Hey guys, welcome to the Quacks Podcast. Now today I have an interview with Clint Ober for you. He is the discoverer of what is called grounding or earthing. Now if you've never heard of grounding, it's basically when you connect your body in some way to the earth. That may mean walking around barefoot or using a bracelet, sheet, or pad that is connected to the grounding hole in a wall socket. And if that sounds like some crazy hippie logic, just connect to the earth, man. Well, Clint's work has catalyzed over 20 different studies now showing that grounding can help inflammation, sleep, pain and stiffness, circulation, blood pressure, stress, depression, anxiety, fatigue, blood glucose, blood viscosity, immunity, thyroid function, metabolism, wound healing, and the list goes on. Now, how does it do this? Well, Clint will explain it, but in a nutshell, the Earth has a negative charge and is a source of electrons, and it can counteract many of these stresses and the stress processes that are natural and in our bodies. Now, without the Earth, those processes, they run wild and they cause disease. And in this interview, Clint is going to tell us his story of how he discovered grounding, and it really ties a lot of the themes that this podcast has touched on together. So enjoy the interview. All right, we have Clint Ober on the podcast today. Clint, really excited to have you on. I feel honored that you came on because you were the one who pretty much started, I believe, this whole earthing, grounding, movement. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, I appreciate you taking interest in it and having me on, and hopefully having a good conversation.
Yes. So what I'm wondering if we can get into is just, because you started this whole thing, I saw a little bit online of how you kind of came to it. I saw something like you grew up around some Native Americans, but why don't we just get into how did this all start? How did you get into all this?
So basically, I started out in Montana, and my family had cattle, and so I spent a lot of time, taking care of cattle and animals on the ranch. And my grandfather told me, he said, here's what your job is, to go out there and to keep your eye on, look at all the animals, make sure that they're healthy and they're happy. And if you see one that's got glassy eyes or it's not acting like it should, then you take them out of the herd. Then you go ride the pasture and find out if there's any noxious weeds or the grass is too short or something wrong with the water. And in doing that, you find something wrong. But the concept is something in the pasture made the cow sick or affected the cow's health. So anyhow, you move the herd to where there's better grass or just whatever it takes to maintain the pasture in a pristine, or the cattle in a pasture that's pristine, so that they can stay healthy. So anyhow, I have this prevention bent. When I look at anything and I hear any of the kids or anybody's got a health issue, what caused that? And that was the question I always ask. But that'll come up later. But anyhow, after growing up in that environment, then I also grew up, next to the Native American, and they're kind of earthy people. In the sense, back then, a lot of them still lived in the teepees. Government came in, moved them into houses. They moved back out in the teepees, and then in the late 50s, they came back, moved them in, and took away their teepees. But anyhow, so anyhow, I kind of, nature. I grew up in nature, and I spent a lot of time in nature. And the Native American culture, they kind of teach. And, that everything's connected. It's all one. The grass is your cousin, all that kind of stuff. And so anyhow, you just grow up with that outlook. And but anyhow, after I left there, I went to work in the communications industry, where we had, low power television, translators, television stations, and microwave, all that kind of stuff, and cable television. And I focused mostly on cable television. And anyhow, in the early days in Montana, you have one or two signals off air, and one was right and one was left, and anyhow, so it was all kind of, you lived in a little bubble. But when cable came along, and we could, bring TV channels in from Helena or Casper, Wyoming, or Denver, and have more to see, but more than anything else, we got to see how other people's news, so our world expanded. And then, so I fell in love with that concept, And that was back in the early 60s. And so I cut my teeth in the cable TV industry. I guess I'm one of the original pioneers up in Montana. So we started building cable systems, and in that industry, if you're going to run a wire into the home, first of all, in order to have electrical stability in your system, you have to ground everything to the earth, so there's no noise, there's no static charges, and you protect everything from lightning and fire. And so anytime you build the cable system, all the cable that's in the air, the aerial cables, you have to ground them almost every other pole to the ground. And the reason is because the wind blows and it creates static electricity on the lines, or if there's lightning or any kind of charge in the atmosphere, then it'll hit those cables and it needs to go to ground. So grounding is, anybody in the communications industry, grounding is essential. I mean, it's something you know everything about, because if there's noise or instability, it's usually related to lack of ground. So anyhow, when the cable industry, before we put a cable in a home or run a wire into a home, you have to install a ground block via the cable in, cut the cable and put a ground block on it, then run the cable on into the house. And that way, if there's any lightning or anything, it'll go to the ground and it won't go into the home, blow up a TV or start a fire. and most important to us at that time was you have electrically stable environment, so that you have good sound, good pictures, good data. We didn't have too much data back then, but so everything was perfect. So we had perfect pictures. And so I spent 30 years in that industry. I retired when I was about 50 years old, and the reason I retired is I had a root canal done, and I ended up with an abscess in my liver. And about a few weeks after I had that, I ended up in a trauma center, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong, and so they put me in a CAT scan, found out it was an abscess, drained my liver, and the next morning they asked me if anybody had bitten me. I said no, and they said the infection that I had was from a bacteria in the mouth. Mm-hmm. And then they asked if I had any dental work, and I told them yes, and they said, well, that's probably what caused it. And it was around Christmas time in Denver. I don't remember the years anymore, but anyhow, so the good news was they found out what it was. The bad news was that it had created a lot of damage to my liver, and I was young enough to get a new liver, and I wasn't an alcoholic or anything. But the problem was I didn't have the time, they said, to do that. So anyhow, they fixed me up, sent me home, kept me on IVs, and they told me the best thing for you to do right now is to go home and get everything in order. Like you may not survive this.
Wow.
And a couple 3 days later, a young surgeon called from, I think it was Swedish Medical Center in Denver. And they said, we understand your condition, and we think that we'd like to go in and try to cut out as much of the liver as we can and do whatever and keep you alive, and because the liver grows back, but they didn't know how much they could take out and still sustain normal function. And so anyhow, I went in and went through the surgery. I didn't have any option. And I did survive, and I'm just grateful for that. Very painful, but it took me about 6 months before I could really walk very far. I would add a few steps every day, and so in the process, I went through this kind of phase, that wow, I almost died. And I lived in Evergreen, Colorado, up on a mountain area, and I had a 5,000 square foot, 1-bedroom A-frame home. I had cars. I had everything you could, everybody, 50-year-old guy, everything you could ever want, playing king of the mountain like we all do. And here I was about to die, and I looked out and I said, if I were to die, what would happen to all this stuff? I spent my whole life collecting it, and so I just kind of went through this phase where I didn't want to own anything, so I called my kids, told them to come and get whatever they wanted, and I gave away the rest, sold everything. I didn't go back to work. I owned a fairly large company in Denver. I didn't go back to work, sold it to the employees, and I bought a small RV. It's 30 foot long. I guess that's small, but anyhow, so I spent the next 4 years just driving around the country. But the big thing that hit me was, that I almost died, and my whole life was about collecting all this stuff and owning it, and I never really owned it. It owned me because I spent my life taking care of it once I bought it, like art or anything. And so I just, and I felt I'm very uncomfortable with myself because if that would have been the end, I would have been, not happy with myself. So I said to myself, I need to go find something I can do so the next time that I go out, I can look back and say, it doesn't mean anything to anybody else, but what it means to me that I did something worthwhile and that my time was worthwhile. It was about something more than just chasing money. So that's how this adventure started. And so anyhow, I spent about 4 years running around the country in national parks primarily, and nice county parks where you could park RVs, and just spending a lot of time in nature. And I ended up down in Key Largo on the bay side, and so every night I would look out over the Gulf of Mexico and watch the sunsets. Manatee would come up. But anyhow, one night I just had this feeling, I got to go do something other than just go around and play with the RV people. And so I had this feeling come over me, I need to go back west. So I went back west. And then I'd been out there for almost 4 years. And so I went back and I ended up in Tucson, Arizona. I thought I'd stay there, but, and I ended up not liking that. So I ended up going up to Flagstaff, which is more like Montana, where I'm from. And on the way up the hill, I ran, it was really late. So there was a sign going into Sedona, Arizona, of all places. Never been there. And they had an RV sign there. And I said, well, I'll just go in there and spend the night and go up tomorrow. And so I pulled into an RV park there, and some place was closed, but normally you just go park and pay in the morning. And so I woke up in the morning, looked outdoors, and I said, well, I'm not leaving here. This is like living in a national park. So I ended up spending about 2 years, a little over 2 years in Sedona. And while I was there, I had a lot of art originally, and I always had a big interest in art. And I had a background in stage lighting when I was a kid. And so they have a lot of art galleries there. So I started, whenever they would bring a special artist to town or do a major show of any kind in one of the local galleries, I would go in and light it up for them, and they could, make it look really good. And so one day when I was finishing something, I went back to my little cubby hole, and I was typing on the computer, and the computer kept crashing. Every time this is back in 1998. So the computer kept crashing, and I knew that it was static electricity. So I went and got a piece of copper tape, taped it across the front of my desk, connected it to a ground wire, and connected it to the electrical ground. So then before I touched the computer, I would touch the copper, then I would go touch my computer to start up, and I never had any problems because I discharged the static on my body before I started playing with the computer. Today, most computers are grounded, so you don't have those problems. But back in, 98, 97, 98, those computers were pretty fragile and very, very electrically sensitive. So, but anyhow, that's where it all started. And then after I got through doing that, I went outdoors and I just sat on a bench. And here up pulls a big tour bus. And it was full of, it was a group from, I believe, Japan. And the odd thing about it is they were all wearing kind of a white Nike type tennis shoe. And it kind of stood out. It was obvious that they were all white. And I thought, well, they'd just been to a strip mall and they were on sale and everybody bought a pair. But anyhow, I intuitively asked, I said, I wonder if there's a consequence to us humans no longer being grounded. And we build up this static electricity on our body. Because before we were always grounded. We were always in the old days when I was a kid, I grew up in the late 40s and early 50s. And back then you were barefoot most of the time. Your shoes were leather. And if it rained, you didn't have galoshes or some kind of a rubber cover. You had to take your shoes off and carry them so they didn't get wet, because that would ruin their leather shoes. So anyhow, barefoot is very common. And I didn't know, this just came out of nowhere. And so that night I went home and I did the same thing at my house. I took a meter out and I went out and I started measuring the difference when I'm grounded on my body versus when I'm not grounded. And of course you have static electricity every time if you have synthetic clothing of any kind on, or carpeting and rubber shoes or whatever, every time you lift your foot or move anything, you create static charges. They're mostly unnoticed to people. The only people who know that really are concerned about static are if you work in a dynamite factory or gasoline or have software, chips, computers, anything, 911 centers, any mission critical. The employees have to be grounded to prevent static electricity from creating a problem. But in the home, you don't think about it, and it's really not a problem by and large. But I did recognize there was a lot of EMF, the electric fields that are radiating from the electrical appliances, cords, the wiring in your walls. And as you go from room to room, it'll change. You get closer to an electrical appliance, it'll go up. And if you get close to certain walls, it'll go up. And you go to a refrigerator and there's none. And so then I recognized the refrigerator was grounded, or the chassis on the refrigerator. So anyhow, I went through the house, and then I recognized in the bedroom is where they were the highest.
Wow. Because
I was laying down on a bed, and then you have the wiring in the walls at the head of your bed where electrician comes in, and waist high they run the wires back and forth before they put the wallboard on. And up and down to the switches and to the sockets and the cords. And so there's a lot of wire in your house that it's invisible because you don't see it. And, a lot of people are worried about EMF on a lamp. Well, that's not a problem. It's the wiring in so anyhow, when they put the wallboard up, then you put your bed in there, you put your head on a pillow, and so your head is within 6 inches of these electrical wires in the wall. And most people don't know about this, and they don't worry about it. And I didn't really worry about it, except that I thought, well, I'm going to ground myself and see what happens here. So I went and got some metal duct tape that you would use for metal ducts, for ducting for furnaces and so on. And I laid it across my bed, and I connected it to an alligator clip into a wire, threw it out the window, connected it to a homemade ground rod. And then I took a meter and connected it to the ground. And then I would test my body to see, and as long as I was on the metal tape, the conductive tape, then I was grounded and I had no charge on my body. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. But I was just laying in bed playing with the meter, and next thing I knew, it was morning. And the meter was laying down beside my side. And I thought, wow, there's something going on here, because normally for me to go to sleep, I have to take Advil. I was 50 years old. I was raised on a ranch. I was a cowboy. I skied for 30 years. I played tennis. I've done. I've beaten myself up pretty good. When I was a kid, on weekends we'd just go ride, pay our entry fee and ride in rodeos just for fun.
Oh man,
steer riding or whatever. But a couple 6-packs and a $20 bill, you can have a pretty good weekend. But anyhow, so I thought, well, there's something really significant here, because this is the first time I've laid down and went to sleep with no problem in a long time. And so I did that for a couple more days, same thing, put down more tape. And then I was, I had a couple of friends there, and I said, you guys got to try this. I don't know if you don't have any sleep problems, it won't probably be anything, but everybody has sleep problems. So, and when you live in Sedona, there's not a lot to do, so. So anyhow, I grounded a few of my friends, and so one of them came over a couple of days later, and he said, do you think this could have any effect on my arthritis? And I said, I don't think so. I think it's just about sleep. And then I remembered that my pain had gone way down and almost insignificant. And I thought, wow, there's something going on here. Then back then we had AOL, and you had data retrieval, Nexus Lexis, where you go into databases and retrieve information. Tried to find out what I could about, how grounding affects health. There's nothing in the literature at all. I went down to the University of Arizona, found a friend of mine down there that by the name of Gary Schwartz, who was, he ended up doing a couple of studies for it. But anyhow, just asking, is there anything in the literature? Do you ground? I mean, why does grounding a body affect pain? Why does it affect sleep? And they said, well, it doesn't. And I said, well, it certainly does. But anyhow, so there was nothing in the literature at all. Came back to Sedona and spent a couple, 3 or 4 weeks. And I said, this is real. It works. And everybody we play with it, the same thing. If they have arthritis, you just ground their hand and the arthritis pain will come down. And so I said, well, I got to figure this out. So I hopped in my RV and I drove out to LA, and I went to UCLA because I figured those guys are smart. They know everything. And I went in and connected with some people in the sleep lab and told them what I wanted. I said, there's no information. They didn't have any information except that when you operate on people, you have to ground them, to prevent any static sparks or anything from creating a cardio event, or if they're using cauterization, or if there's any gas or oxygen in the room. So everything does have to be grounded to prevent static in OR. So anyhow, I got to meet with some high profile down there, and I told him what I was doing, and he said, you expect me to believe that if somebody's going to put a nail in the ground, tie a wire around it, then go tie it around somebody's toe, that they're going to sleep better? I said, well, not exactly. I mean, make them sleep on something. And he said, he says, how do you say it? You're crazy. You're nuts. Or get out of here. You're nuts. You're crazy. Something like that. And we all laughed about it. And so we did carry on a conversation. But he said, it cost $5 million to do a study and could take 3 to 5 years. And then there may not be any results. And even if there were results, it may never get published. And I said, well, that's kind of a dumb idea. So I went up to Ventura, and because I had some friends up there, and I just parked there, and I got a hold of the kids that I met down at UCLA. I said, why don't you guys help me design a study? I want to do it myself. And so I hired a nurse, had these kids help me. We pulled together a protocol for a study. I made up 60 ground mats. They were 12 inches wide, 24 inches long. They were conductive cloth. And so I glued them to a felt pad, connected them to a wire with a snap, and then connected the wire to either a ground rod. They would go out connected to a ground rod or to the electrical ground. And in the study, half of them were working ground, half of them were dummy ground. And so we rounded up 60 people to do a study, most of them via beauty salons in Ventura, and because they were the easiest place to find people who had pain and would talk about it. Guys would never talk about it. No pain, no gain. But the women, yeah, I've got pain. Give me 2 of them. And so anyhow, we ended up getting 60 subjects, and we put their names in a hat. 30 of them were grounded, and the only person that knew that was the nurse and myself. And then the kids that were helping with the study, they knew nothing, so it was a double blind. And then I went out and installed the pads in the homes. And then 30 days later, we had another lady that came, and went out to the homes and did a questionnaire and picked up and retrieved the product, the grounding product, so that we could verify. And anyhow, about a month later, when they were digesting all of the results, we noticed, well, first of all, the grounded subjects, they all had improved sleep, reduced pain, and just general overall well-being. But there was some of the younger women, they had a significant reduction of PMS. A couple of them had reduction of tinnitus, arthritis, all kinds of things. And then the ungrounded people, the people that weren't grounded, they had, no significant changes. This study is on the earthinginstitute.net on their website under research. And it was the first, it was more of an anecdotal study than anything at that time. And so, but it was enough evidence that I could get medical people to take an interest. And so anyhow, in that study, it was, I found after that study, and it was published immediately in the ESD journal, which is electrostatic discharge, in the industry where everybody is grounded. Like employees are grounded, everybody's grounded, and all employees. And so they took an interest in it and they published it, because then their idea was, well, if our employees are healthier because they're grounded, but that wasn't my goal. So I ended up meeting a retired anesthesiologist by the name of Morris Ghali in San Diego. And he said, I really interested in what you're doing. He said, I don't think it's what you think it is. He said, but I'd like to, do a small study, and so we can rule out what it is and isn't, based on his expertise. I understood most everything about electrical, but I didn't understand hardly anything about physiology. And what I was surprised to learn is most people back then didn't, in the medical and research industry, they knew little about electrical. So it was kind of interesting. So anyhow, we filed an IRB. We ended up getting 12 subjects. They were primarily women. And so he wanted to test cortisol. So we measured their cortisol, their circadian cortisol, every 4 hours for 24 hours before grounding. And then a month later, 6 weeks later, we had them do it again, grounded them. Then we had them measured the cortisol every 4 hours for 24 hours. And then we had a profile before grounding and after grounding. And this study is also at the earthinginstitute.net, the cortisol study. But anyhow, so what it showed was that when after grounding or before grounding, their circadian cortisol secretion profiles were kind of like spaghetti. Older women were exhausted, very low. Younger women were very high, but they weren't. They were like spaghetti, but after the grounding, then their profiles all synchronized. They were all in perfect bands. The younger ladies came down, the older ladies came up, and it just normalized. And so what we recognized was, okay, there was two things we recognized: that cortisol is related to inflammation and fight or flight and stress and all these things.
Yes.
Exhausted adrenals is related to living in a chronically elevated sympathetic state, which is, so, he had this all tied together. And so he said, well, what we have here is, one, we're reducing pain, because that's why everybody's cortisol is leveling out, and stress, stress and pain to him. And he used the word oxidative stress, meaning, now back then in 2000, they didn't talk about inflammation. That was not a term that was common in the medical literature.
Yeah, sure.
That didn't come along until 2004. So anyhow, he said, well, everybody's reporting reduction of pain, so we're affecting pain. And we see this, we see the grounding affects pain. We hear it, we don't know, but we didn't know the mechanism of action. What's causing this to happen? And so what we thought we would do is, first of all, do a larger cortisol study, but everybody got excited that we showed it to. And they said, no, let's test this, let's test that. And so we did a lot of studies trying to measure the electrical pathways of the body and the electrical phenomena of the body. And then we ended up again asking the question, why does grounding do, what happens in the body that causes grounding to reduce inflammation or pain? And so anyhow, we ended up meeting a cardiologist in Connecticut. His name was Stephen Sinatra. We thought, well, cardiologists, they understand electrical because the heart's electrical. And he did. And he really got what we were doing. And he said, Clint, if you're affecting pain, he says, you need to look at inflammation. That was the first time I ever heard the word inflammation. And I didn't know what it was. And he said, because you can't have inflammation. I mean, you can't have pain unless you have oxidative stress or inflammation, because that's the fire that creates the pain that, that screams. It's the body's way of saying, hey, I'm on fire here and I need to put the fire out. Getting ahead of myself there a little bit. But so anyhow, I started doing research, and I ended up researching white blood cells and learning about the oxidative burst and reactive oxygen species. And then I learned that neutrophils are the primary promoter of inflammation or oxidative stress. And what they do is they come, if you have a pathogen or a damaged cell, a neutrophil will come over and it'll wrap itself around the pathogen, and then it releases reactive oxygen species. And these are electrically charged molecules. They're kind of an acid, and they will rip electrons from the pathogen or the damaged cell, and that's how the immune system disposes of them. Pretty simplistic. Then I said, okay, that's okay. Now we know that the immune system is electrical, because reactive means that these are electrically charged molecules and they steal electrons. So that's an electrical event. So then we were trying to figure out why when you ground the body, does it reduce this pain? It's reducing the oxidation, because the pain's coming down, so the oxidation has to be coming down first. So then we began to put two and two together, and we use cowboy logic. That's what I do best. And I said, well, if you ground, you take an electrode patch, put it in the palm of somebody's hand, they have an arthritic flare, and the pain starts to come down, and it does immediately. Then what we're doing is we're pouring water on a fire, and we're pouring negative charge or electrons. We're flooding the body with electrons. At that point, it's like pouring water on a fire, and it reduces the oxidation, and it reduces the pain. So, but still, there was missing pieces, and so it ended up coming down to we had to eventually go back and look in history. What happened. Back in 1960. Before then, most everybody was wearing rubber soles or leather soled shoes, or they were barefoot. And like diabetes, which is an inflammation-related health disorder, it started to manifest in the population heavily and started increasing exponentially back in the middle 50s, and then it's still rising to this day. The same with autism, lupus, MS, Parkinson's, cancer, all of these anything that is an autoimmune-related health disorder. And I was surprised to learn that you can't have cancer unless you have chronic inflammation for an extended period. So and so then we had to go backwards and say, okay, we're beginning to understand, how this all works. So when the body's grounded, it's flooded with electrons, but how do those electrons get around in the body? And so the next study that came up that was most significant was we figured out how to measure the electrical surface charge on red blood cells, because blood goes everywhere, and once a minute it circulates throughout the body. And when you look at people's blood, when they're ungrounded, it's kind of thick and sticky. and you have a lot of rouleau, what they call rouleau formation. And then when we grounded subjects, the rouleau formation would just totally instantly dissipate. So then we looked at it, and so Gaetan Chevalier was the brains that figured this out. Steve was a cardiologist, and I was just there pushing everybody to get it done. And so anyhow, he said, well, there's the red blood cells are electrical. I mean, they have an electrical surface charge. And so when they stick together, they're short of electrons, and they're sharing electrons. And that's sort of like electroplating a bumper. The bumper is negative. The plating that you're putting on the bumper is positive, and you put them together, and they bond, and you can't, it's plating, electroplating. So what's happening is with the blood, you have an electroplation. That's event is taking, and then when we ground the body, we're flooding the body with free electrons. So then we decided, okay, let's ground the body. Let's measure the electrons on the blood before, and then let's ground the body for an hour or whatever, and then remeasure the blood. And then what we found was that when you ground the body, then it becomes negatively charged, like the earth itself. If the earth is conductive, the body's conductive. When you put bare feet on the earth, then you are part of the earth, and you electrically equalize with the electrical potential of the earth. You're at the same potential, meaning you are flooded with free electrons. That's what ground is. And then, so anyhow, then to our surprise, the red blood cells themselves become grounded, and they take on a negative charge similar to the earth itself. And the more negative the red blood cell becomes, then because they're round, then they repel each other. There's like two negatively charged magnets. You push them together, they'll repel each other. So here we have the same phenomena with electric field on these blood cells, where they're repelling each other, and that's thinning the blood, normalizing the blood viscosity. And we did an actual study on this, and it was profound. It was really challenging to get published because nobody understood it. Nobody understood, except for a couple of people, that the blood is, dynamic, electrically dynamic, in that it equalizes with, you eat good food, you drink water, and if there's some negative charge in it, that's going to, be an electron donor, donate electrons to the body. But anyhow, so our thought was, well, the blood's, circulating once a minute. So if you thin the blood, then it can get in and out of the capillaries easier, because if you have a lot of rouleau formation, then the blood gets too thick and it can't get into the extremities, the capillaries. And so we just tied that together and said, okay, by thinning the blood, or by grounding the body, it normalizes blood viscosity, it thins the blood naturally. Then the blood gets in and out of the capillaries, and that oxygenates the tissue and provides an infinite supply of electrons, because the blood is coming in and out every minute, and it can replenish itself wherever it's getting the ground from. And so that's what's reducing the inflammation. But anyhow,
Clint,
but then we had to go ahead.
I was just going to jump in here. So I have a couple questions.
Sure.
First I want to just say your story is awesome. I mean, it's almost like an archetype where you, you almost die, and then this causes this awakening. You give away all these things that you thought were important, but aren't important anymore. Yeah. And you travel around, and then over time, this realization kind of gets ingrained, or it gets into you, and then you discover gold, which I don't know. I just wanted to say that was really cool.
It's kind of, I had to have that background. Otherwise I wouldn't have been able to look at this the way, from the viewpoint that I did.
Yeah.
I looked at the body electrically.
Yeah. So what, when you say pain, arthritis and that kind of thing, what types of pain? Is it all types of pain? Or, is it like fibromyalgia, or is it more of the osteo pain that like you have from, riding bulls in your youth?
Well, no, it's like any kind of, whether it's acute pain or chronic pain. And let me give you an example. if you have arthritis, the older guys, they get in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on, the arthritis starts to show up. And the older they get, the more embedded it gets, and so they'll have flares. And so you can put a patch, an electrode patch, like an EKG patch, connect it to a ground cord, connect that to an electrical ground or an outdoor ground, and within 5 minutes, the pain, the flaring pain, the pain that's coming from that arthritis stops. So what's happening there is you have tissue damage. The immune system it started out with maybe one cell, one pathogen, or an overworked wrist or something, but there's tissue damage. So the neutrophils are sent in to clean it up, and in the process, they're producing these excess reactive oxygen species more than it needed, evidently, to reduce a pathogen, and they're only going to last, a few nanoseconds, and then they're going to steal an electron from the closest thing in the environment that has an electron, and that's obviously another cell. In this case, a healthy cell. So it damages. So these excess remaining radicals that are no longer grounded. The reason they're not grounded is because we started wearing shoes 60 years ago. Or started insulating ourselves from the earth. And so now the body's short of electrons. It's no longer negatively charged like it would be in nature. An example, animals in the wild that live on the earth that are grounded at all times. They don't have cancer. They don't have heart cardiovascular disease, lupus, MS, any of them. And but the animals who live indoors with their owners, they all manifest similar autoimmune diseases, inflammation-related health disorders as their owners. 50% of indoor animals die from cancer. Outdoor animals, it's a rare event. Indoor humans, 50%. So there's a corollary. And so anyhow, what it is we used to always be grounded, and that was our natural protection. That's the immune system's mop. I mean, anytime there was an excess radical, it just the free electrons from the earth mopped it up, prevented it from doing the damage that we're talking about. Now, there's other types of charge in the body and everything else, but I'm talking about the body, in an electrically gross state. But for instance, the blood becoming more negative.
Yeah, so it sounds like what you're saying is that most of the modern day issues are because of this change over to rubber-soled shoes. I think most people who would hear that would be kind of skeptical and amazed.
Oh no, everybody's skeptical. I mean, the guys are totally skeptical. They say that's crazy. You're nuts.
Was leather better?
Well, yeah, leather is a semiconductor. So when you wear leather shoes, you hydrate them with the perspiration from your foot because your feet sweat a lot. And then you have the body salts and everything. So leather sole shoes are semiconductive. So you're going to get electrons for sure if you're wearing a leather sole shoe, if you're wearing it all the time. And because it'll stay damp. If you don't wear them very often, then they'll dry out. But
okay.
But anyhow, the guys, they all say, well, if this were true, I'd know about this. Somebody would have told this. It's funny, and the women kind of accept it because they don't like shoes. They kick their shoes off whenever they can at work. Most of them have their bare feet under the desk. At home, they rarely wear shoes in the house. So it's a different thing, but
almost intuitive or something.
Yeah. So what happened here was in 2004, Ritger and that group back at Boston, Mass. There was they had been studying inflammation, or what they called inflammation, and we had been studying this grounding for like 4 years. And they published a paper, and it was written up in Time magazine. And on the front cover of Time magazine, it showed the body, and it showed flames, and it had the word inflammation. And they said, you do not have cancer. You do not have this health disorder, health disorder. What you have is chronic inflammation. And it manifests differently in different people based on their genetics, their lifestyle, and their living environment. And I had to sift through all of that. But what it was really saying was that you have to, inflammation is the fire that is going on in your body that is creating this tissue damage, which ends up manifesting as these health disorders. And so the concept is this: if the immune system, health is the body's most natural state. In nature, you can see it in the animal kingdom. You can see it in the plants world. You can see it in the insect world. So that's health is our most natural state. So if you don't have health, then something is compromising your immune system. Your immune system is being taxed to the point that it can't restore and maintain health, because the immune system is the number one key to health. And so what's happening here is when the inflammation sets off in the body, when the fire gets started, then the immune system is producing neutrophils to forever clean up the damage that is being created, and in the process, the chain reaction or the collateral damage is what's starting the fire, and that's like burning a log. You put a match to it; it slowly builds up.
So the electrical system, it's almost like stimulating the immune system. That's kind of what you're saying.
Well, no, the immune system is releasing. You have damage. First of all, you have the first initial damage, where some reactive oxygen species are attacking healthy tissue. And then the immune system, because of that damage, the immune system sends more neutrophils or whatever white blood cells that are necessary to try to clean that up. But in the process, because there's not enough redox potential or negative charge to reduce the remaining radicals that are left over each time a neutrophil does its cascade. So the immune system is being taxed. All the resources of the immune system are being spent on trying to put out the fire that it itself is feeding.
Okay, gotcha.
And so now the body can't take care of the normal things. The immune system can't take care of the normal things that restore and maintain health. So what this whole story ended up being was if you have a health disorder, then that's inflammation related, and you can just go to Google and type any health disorder that you have or that you know, and type in the word inflammation, and up will come anywhere from 100 to 200 papers, talking about how inflammation is related, how it's related to inflammation. It's like cancer. Number one protocol for cancer now is first thing is reduce inflammation, because that's what started it. You have to clear the inflammation away so the immune system can go in and correct that situation. And so anyhow, the concept here is very simple. When you ground the body, you can't have inflammation in a grounded body, because that's what grounding is about. When your body is grounded to the earth, just like a refrigerator or any other electrical appliance, when it's grounded to the earth, it conducts from the earth the negative surface charge of the earth, and it's at equal potential with the earth, meaning it's negative, no charge. And then the immune system, the fire instantly goes out. The inflammation in your body, the fire instantly goes out. If you have MS and it's neutrophils eating up the myelin sheath, you patch the hand, the pain stops, the inflammation stops. And I can tell that woman at that time, you no longer have MS. What you have now is you have MS damage. As long as you're grounded, there won't be no MS.
Wow.
But the healing and repair, that may take time. The damage is there, but now you have a healing problem, or the challenge that you have to deal with. So the concept here is very simple. We accidentally, we invented light bulbs, we invented TV, we invented all of our modern things, but one of them was shoes, and we accidentally insulated ourselves from the earth and completely. And as that grew, that insulation grew over the years with carpets and foam beds and shoes and all these things. Today, 95% of the people wear a rubber sole shoe. Where 60 years ago, 95% of the people wore a leather shoe. So that's the trigger that that we correlate everything with. Now, everybody can say, well, it's because of high fructose sugar and these things. They came along in the 70s, when this curve was already in place. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of people say, well, it's EMF. Well, we had EMF since the 20s or earlier, but that they didn't show up on the curve until in the 50s. So, what changed in our environment in the 50s? Started to change in the 50s, and it's very simple. It's the modern carpets, shoes, television came along. We started spending more time in the house. We spent less time outdoors. And you have to correlate this with the animal kingdom, because then it's cowboy logic. It makes sense. Take the horse out of the barn. If he's got arthritis and he's all stoved up, take him out of the barn, put him in the pasture, and come back in 6-8 weeks, and he'll be all healed up and ready to go again. So it's the same thing. This is kind of ingrained in anybody that comes from, the agriculture or animal world. But we don't think about it. It's just it's called horse sense. You just know these things. You don't know that grounding. We never knew that grounding prevented pain, because when we were grounded, we never had pain.
Well, that's so interesting. I mean, one thing you mentioned along with pain was EMF and also diabetes. Now, I've done some research into EMF quite a bit, and one of the things they always talk about with people who are exposed to large amounts of EMF, like maybe smart meters or they live under a cell phone tower, is over time, it seems like they always have these same symptoms, which are loss of blood sugar control, kidney malfunction, and then eventually type 2 diabetes. It kind of destroys the metabolism over time. So from what you've seen, does grounding counteract this? I mean, have you seen people, maybe lose weight and have better metabolisms after they get grounded?
Well, of course. I mean, when you get grounded, you put the fire out, you reduce the inflammation in the body, the immune system comes back, and then you give it some decent food. Now you've got energy again. The body can function. So here's the way I look at EMF and all of these things. I know a lot about all of this. Mm-hmm. I assumed that there was a problem with the EMF until I spent a lot of time, 23 years, doing this. And it's like they came along and they said, it was the electrification of America that, started all of these modern health disorders. And they talked about became evident when they started running electrical in the rural areas. Because whenever they started running the electrical, then certain health disorders showed up. But what they didn't correlate was the growth of shoes or the growth of carpets or the growth. It's the same period. It's the same curve. So to say that EMF caused diabetes is insane. That is an inflammation-related health disorder. The EMF is not going to create inflammation in your body. What's going to create inflammation in your body is a loss of ground, loss of redox potential, not having enough free electrons to reduce reactive oxygen species. When the immune system is doing its normal thing like it does all day long, then the immune system has to 24/7 clean up damaged cells, replace cells. I mean, the immune system is going 100, full 24/7. It's active. It's in there cleaning up and whatever. So when you disrupt that system, that's what causes health disorder. So, but anyhow, EMF, when you are wearing rubber sole shoes standing in your living room, then your body is an antenna. And it will attract, and you will become electrified with that charge, just like static electricity or anything else. And cell phones, that's a whole different thing. But anyhow, so the reason we ground everything in the communications industry and shield everything is to prevent what we call EMI, electromagnetic interference. So, and what happened with me and the EMF community, when I first ran into them, I went to one of their meetings down in San Diego, and they asked me to explain grounding to them. But before that, they were talking about, how they train people to do come into the home with meters and measure all the electric fields and measure their lamps and measure their, the poles outdoors and all these things. And they would charge people $1,000 to do that. And then they would come back with a report, and anywhere from $2,500 to $25,000 to fix the electrical in their home so that they were safe, And I looked at this and I said, I don't really understand this. I said, because all you've got to do to protect the body is grounded, just like a refrigerator or any other thing. And I said, you can do that with mats like we do in the ESD industry for employees. You can use wrist straps. You can use grounded floors, grounded shoes, all these things. And they said, well, and they didn't understand grounding. These people at that time, the only thing they understood is well, here's a trimeter, and you can measure electric field, magnetic field, and so on. And I looked at them and I said, you're measuring the wrong thing. Or a magnetic field, you can't stop no matter what. It'll go through brick. It'll go through anything. The electric field, the only thing, if you ground something, then you're protected from the electric field naturally. That's why we ground electrical environments. That's why you ground the chassis of a receiver or transmitter or anything electrical. So anyhow, they had a business built around going out and doing that. And I don't want to interfere with anybody else's business or how anybody makes a living. The world is a crazy place out there. But anyhow, I took odds with them because I said, if you're going to, you can't go out and make claims and say that, EMF caused diabetes or it caused MS or it caused anything. Because if that person were grounded, then they would never have it in the first place. But if they're ungrounded, then it's the immune system has been compromised. And that's what that's the underlying mechanism that causes health disorder. Now, granted, environmental influences like electric fields and things, here's the only way that an electric field could affect the human body. It can burn it if it's close and high frequency, like if you were to go up and hug a cell phone tower or something. But that's not possible, and that's totally can't happen. So what happens is the human body. Long time ago, we used to live in the woods, and we have a fight or flight system. So anytime there's a noise, or we hear it, or we see things, or if there's a bear in the woods, is how I like to relate it because I've had this experience. If there's a bear in the woods, sometimes you can't hear him, you can't see him, you can't smell him, but the hair on your arms is telling you there's a bear in the woods. So we can sense each other electrically, electric fields from bodies, humans, and plants, and so on. But back then, we didn't have all this noise in our environment. We didn't have all this electrical noise, TV frequencies, sure, radio frequencies, all that stuff. So the environment was electrically more quiet, the frequencies. And so you could feel or sense electrical frequencies from another live thing. Any warm body is putting out an electric field of some kind. And so your fight or flight, your sympathetic system would peak and the cortisol would rise. And then your parasympathetic would release a few hormones just to modulate that or dampen that effect, to give you a few seconds so that you can make a good decision to run or to fight or get prepared. And today, so that's built into us. We know that. Now, today, there is so much noise in the environment that we've lost a lot of our perception. It's like women, if somebody drops a fork on the floor, and a woman, you'll see a visceral response, and that's her fight or flight kicking in. And a man, he'll just sit there and ask somebody dropped a fork, and no response. So women are more sensitive than men are, and I think it has to do with, they are protecting children and they're protecting each other, so they're more sensitive. That's all. I'm not sure how to say that any better. So, but anyhow, so if there is an electric field and it's elevated, I mean, static charge in your home, if you walk across the carpet, you can create 5,000 volts of static charge. It has to be 3,000 to 5,000 before you would see a spark if you touched a door. Other than that, it's down around the 500 or 1,000 volts. But you have high voltage on your body from static electricity almost all times. But it does bleed off into if there's humidity in the air, especially. So a lot of people with EMF, you're going to be experiencing a couple of volts of EMF charge. And the thing about static is it's DC, where electric fields from 60 hertz is, it's oscillating 60 times a second. So if you're sitting next to a lamp and it's radiating an electric field, if you're a sensitive person, which I can explain that because, and it's probably good to do that because, but anyhow, if you're a sensitive person, the hair on your arm, it acts as an antenna, and it can sense things and it sends signals into the body, and so it peaks or sparks the fight or flight. But now it's so subtle that and we're so used to it, the immune system doesn't respond very much once it gets used to the noise. It's like a magnet. You can put a magnet on the body. The first thing that's going to happen is the immune system, there's going to be some white blood cells rush to the area and say, what's happening here? And as long as nothing's happening, then eventually it won't respond to the magnet after a week or a few days or whatever. But anyhow, so what's going on here is today we live in a sea of noise, a sea of frequency. It's everything from 10,000 cell phones hitting you at one time to the TV, radio, local police, fire, all those things, business communication, air traffic, and now we have satellites, and it's relentless. If you could see frequencies, you wouldn't be able to. You'd be pitch black because they're everywhere all the time. So anyhow, today we are so used to living in this noise that. This is part of the problem. I'll give you a classic example that I've found. You mentioned fibromyalgia, lupus, MS. These are all the same family. So what happens is the woman, and it's primarily female. So here's a woman who is going about life, and she gets up in the morning and she's got kids, a husband to get off to work, and then she has to get ready to go to work in our modern world today. So she gets up and she's on a dead run. And so anything that doesn't get done right, or, the children are late, cortisol spikes. And then parasympathetic has to calm that down. And then she's driving a car, there's traffic, or she's walking on carpets, or she's exposed to whatever goes on throughout the day. But it's a lot of emotional stress also. So anyhow, what happens is her cortisol is being spiked. The fight or flight is kicking in many, many times a day. The parasympathetic, which is normally modulating that, as time goes on, it becomes burned out. Your adrenals become exhausted, and so the working of the parasympathetic is not there. And then the sympathetic is over responding. I mean, there's nothing to stop it. So it's releasing more cortisol, and then as time goes on, this creates anxiety and irritability. Eventually inflammation, depression, and then you have phantom pain in the body, which is kind of emotional charge pain. And this is related to fibromyalgia, is a classic example. And then, there's a host of other things, like MS, lupus, all of these. I've worked a lot with these ladies over the years, 23 years of this. If you ask them, a 35-year-old, what happened in your life before MS manifest or fibromyalgia, whatever it is, and they'll tell you they didn't know, and then you can ask, well, it's not inheritable, so some event happened, and they'll say they don't remember, and then all of a sudden they'll say, okay, yeah, I remember, a couple of years before this, and I'm thinking of a specific person. She said, we lost our house because of the 2008 financial crisis. Her husband lost his job, and something else went on, and then she eventually ended up getting a divorce. And then a couple of years later is when MS manifested. So what happened was she went through a period of great loss, and she remained in a fight or flight state or a chronically elevated sympathetic state for too long, exhausted the adrenals, and then the body was continuously flooded with cortisol. And then the anxiety, the irritability creates pain. That creates more cortisol. So she got caught up in a vicious cycle. And then eventually the inflammation created chaos in the body, and that compromised the immune system, and then MS took off. So, for instance, MS is neutrophils eating up the myelin sheath. And because there was damage, immune system or neutrophil came, did its original job, but because there wasn't enough redox potential to reduce the excess radicals, it did more damage. Another neutrophil comes and creates more collateral damage, and it just keeps burning. It's a slow burning of the myelin sheath on the nerves. And so so it's loss of ground and going into life. I mean, life is creating all this stress. If she could have grounded it out daily, or went outdoors for a half hour every night when she got home, put her feet on the ground and drained that stress out of the body, drained the cortisol out of the body, the inflammation out of the body. You can't drain the cortisol out, but the effect. And but anyhow, so they live and sleep stressed. They go to work, they're stressed, and they're compensating, with maybe alcohol occasionally, or maybe drugs, or maybe not necessarily hard drugs, but different mechanisms to cope, and everybody ends up with these chronic degenerative health disorders. And so it's all, the cause and effect is all over the place, but the main thing is the immune system. So
okay,
if they can get grounded, that will restore the immune system. If they maintain the immune system, it'll handle anything.
Okay, so if you're new to this, if you've never heard of this before, how often should you be ground per day? I mean, you mentioned that maybe 30 minutes a day would be good, or should somebody try and be ground all day?
Well, I always start with this. Any amount of grounding is better than no ground, and I mean that, any amount. But also, on the other hand, in nature, where we have mammals that have no health disorders, they're grounded all the time, like the large animals, the coyote, the wolf, the ocean creatures, all of them, they're grounded all the time. So they don't have any health disorders. So in nature, we would be grounded 24/7. If we go back a couple hundred years, we were barefoot and we slept on the ground, we slept in caves, and we had health. And then as modern life developed, then we ended up interrupting that, and then disease became, inflammation-related health, modern disease started to manifest. So what I tell everybody, if you can't do anything else, I mean, first of all, you need to experience this. So to experience it, if you're older and you can't walk or don't want to, put a lot of energy, take a chair, go outdoors in the backyard where there's some grass. And if there is no grass, then take a hose and damp down the concrete a little bit if it's dry. And then take your shoes off, put your feet directly on the earth, because the concrete is earth. But grass is what I recommend. And if you're younger, sit on the grass, put your bare feet on the grass, put your hands on the grass, and just sit there for 30 minutes. And notice, that your respiration becomes easier. Your skin color, you're going to turn pink because the blood viscosity is changing. You're going to have everything's going to shift. You're going to see your demeanor will change because you were stressed and tense and whatever. Now you're out there, and you're draining that out of the body. And it's like I tell a lot of people, you can't be angry and mad at the world or anybody if you're outdoors in bare feet sitting on the earth, because the earth discharges all of that stress and makes it go away. But anyhow, so first of all, learn about it, experience it. If you have health disorder of any kind or chronic pain of any kind, then spend a half hour, a minimum of a half hour outdoors in indirect sunlight, and just stay grounded for that period of time and note what's going on in your body. Notice the changes. Notice you'll feel like your body's trickle charging. The Earth's a big battery, you're a little battery, and you're charging up and you're equalizing with the Earth. That is actually happening. And then it's best if you can get some good sunlight, not direct sunlight, but good sunlight, because the second biggest problem we have today in the modern world is we live in homes with roofs. And so we don't get any sunlight. We work in buildings with roofs. So we've lost our sunlight. And, that's photons coming from the Earth hitting us. It affects our vitamin D. Most people have a very low vitamin D, down around, 25, whatever, and it should be around 70 or 80 or above. And but anyhow, start by experimenting. Then, if you can't afford to do anything or don't want to do anything other than that, then spend, when you get up in the morning, go out, stand in the grass for 15, 30 minutes. But most important, come home at night, go outdoors, put your feet on the earth, and stay there for at least 30 minutes, especially women. And this will drain the charge, the inflammation, it'll put out the fire in your body.
Okay, and
then
is there a difference between doing it on the earth versus doing it on, some kind of mat that plugs into the grounding cord in your wall?
No, the mats are designed to replicate standing outdoors on the earth. But most people aren't going to go there to begin with. Okay. They're going to go and check it out. But anyhow, so start there, and then if you understand this and experience, and your experience is good and you feel better and your pain comes down and you're happier, then you probably want to be more grounded. So if you can't ground routinely yourself or have the time to do that, then these mats and everything that we have developed over the years, they're all accidental products. That are a result of doing our studies. We had to have mats and for people to lay on, stand on, and patches. But anyhow, these mats we designed them because the subjects wanted them, the researchers wanted them, and their relatives wanted them, and so we ended up making them. But in the process, we asked people, what is the number one thing we can do? Because people aren't going to take time to get grounded. They're too busy and they won't comply more than a few days. And so we decided, well, let's make something they can sleep on, because you put it on the bed, then all they have to do is go home, lay down, go to sleep, and do what they normally do. No extra work, no thought, nothing. Just go to bed, go to sleep. And so that's how we ended up making that mat. And then at the computer, the little smaller mat, you can put your feet on it, sit on it, or put your computer on, use it for a big mouse pad. But anyhow, so it grounds you and protects you and so on. So those products are available, but education is most important. You have to understand it a little bit to make it make sense. And then once you do, if you can't do it routinely outdoors, these are tools that can ground yourself indoors. And in the future, we have to ground carpets, bedding, furniture, anything we sit, sleep, or walk. Shoes have to be, everything has to, we have to bring, if ground is part of what maintains the immune system electrically stable, then we have to build ground into everything on some basis. And that will happen over the next 20 years. I won't. That's not my job. I've done my job. But anyhow, manufacturers will incorporate. They already make grounded carpets for clean rooms and for, mission critical environments and clean, and so on. So they're readily available. Grounded shoes are readily available for dynamite, gasoline, people who work in clean rooms and all the like. Now, they're not very friendly for consumers yet, but that'll all happen. So grounded beds, that'll show up. And in the meantime, we have a tool you can use until that happens. The problem is It's like we talked to Nike a few times and others, and they said, well, we don't want to make a grounded shoe until somebody comes into our store and wants one. So when the people come in, we'll make them. And that's kind of how it is. So it's a chicken and egg thing here. We need a lot of education, a lot of, and people are going to walk in and say, well, do you have grounded shoes? Do you have grounded mattresses? Do you have grounded furniture? And then it'll come to be, and then everybody will take it for granted, like we do the cell phone. But yes, it's important, especially people whose health is compromised and you want to recover. Yes, then these devices that we're talking about, they're extremely important to be able to sleep grounded, to be able to put the patches on issues where you have flaring pain, like arthritis or lupus or MS or anything that flares, Parkinson, even autism, Alzheimer's. All these are inflammation-related health disorders. So you have to ground the body, stop the fire, and it stops the advancement of these health disorders. But if you're really challenged, then you have to be grounded more than a half hour.
Okay.
But again, some people can't ground more than that at a time. Some people don't have any money, and that's free, and it's highly recommended. So this is an educational movement, and we're supplying these things that we supply are 911 tools, I guess, to get you by until the modern world reinvents itself and integrates grounding into, like a value added into a mattress.
Yeah. So where can people find you or your website or your book?
Well, the Earthing Institute is a good resource for everybody. It's earthinginstitute.net. And that's all of our studies are published there, and there's thousands of reports from people and their stories and questions and answers and all that kind of stuff. And that's just a resource where all the research and everything is deposited. Earthing.com, they sell all of these devices. And the movie that you probably want to watch is called The Earthing Movie. It's available free on YouTube. There's no commercials in it. And it's also available free on Amazon Prime and a host of other areas, but those are the two most common. And it's a hour and 15-minute documentary that kind of gives you a really good understanding by a body of evidence that supports all of this by credible people. Everybody from retired FDA people to
doctors,
PhDs, doctors, everybody, and people that everybody know, like Deepak Chopra and Joe Mercola and people like that. Anyhow, it's so the book is available on Amazon. I think they include one free with every product that anybody orders. The movie is free, and again, it's really, we appreciate all the support because all the money goes to doing more research and educating more people. And there are a lot of people that are starting to come out with other products, and we're trying to figure out how to. You're not going to be able to stop other people from doing this, but it's really important that because it affects health, then the function has to be there. It has to deliver the goods, and it has to be done safely. So that's what we try to lead, and that's what we're trying to do with the Earthing Institute, is put together a protocol and a platform so that they certify that they actually do what people claim they do, shoes and the like.
Well, Clint, I think that's probably a good place to stop, unless there's any other subjects you want to jump into that you think we missed.
No, the only thing that this has to be taken very seriously, because their health is compromised, and it's not about grounding alone. It's a message from nature. We have stepped out of nature. We have disconnected from, electrically. We've given up the sun. Our food is all packaged in fast food now, but it's time for everybody to stop, because health is the business of the day. 25% of the gross national product is healthcare now. That's not right. Our children's health is compromised. So I think it's important that everybody at least take and play with this a little bit, learn about it, teach your kids about it. And anybody who has chronic health disorder, get them a chair, put them outdoors, and educate. This is about education, and it is free. And there are tools to help people cope with it, because the pads and stuff, they don't do anything at all. All they are is extension cords that connect you with the earth. It's the energy of the earth and your immune system that's what this is about. It's reconnecting your body with the earth so that the immune system can remain electrically stable, recover, and restore and maintain your health.
Wow.
Be happy. Be happy.
Yeah, well, Clint, sir, thank you so much for coming on. Like I said, it was an honor, and it's just a fascinating story you have to tell. Yeah. And I'm totally a believer now. I mean, I started grounding myself just a couple weeks ago, and I have noticed such a difference in sleep and calmness. And I mean, I couldn't sit in my computer for more than, 3 hours or so before I'd have to, I just feel weird. I'd have to get up and go somewhere. Yep. Whereas now with a little grounding bracelet, I can sit here for all day, and it's just, it's pretty amazing.
And your energy's still there at the end of the day. That's important.
Yes, for sure.
So it's crazy. I can't believe it took me 20 years to do this. But on the other hand, we didn't disconnect it overnight, and it's going to take 60 years to fix all the things that we've done to ourselves.
It's so dang simple. It's like, why didn't we think of this?
Well, that's a lot of people, a lot of researchers, a lot of PhDs, a lot of people say, how did we miss this? And they come up, the conclusion is that everybody's always looking out there. They're not looking inside. They're looking, in the environment, or they're looking at, other things, trying to blame it on something else.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had an experience in my late 20s, so I'm like almost 35 now. So a little while ago where they installed at my apartment, like one of those bays of smart meters, 11 or 12 smart meters, like right behind my kitchen. And I had no idea what was happening, but I went insane over like 2 months. I thought I was going to die until I figured out, this electrical, this EMF is really affecting me. And so I had to move and stuff, but I had no idea about grounding at the time. I didn't even think about that. So it's just,
The issue I have with EMF is not that EMFs, if you can prudently avoid EMF, you should. I should have made that clear. The attention I was trying to bring to it was EMF is not the problem. The problem is that you're disconnected from the earth. You're no longer grounded. Because if you were grounded, then you would be naturally protected from EMF. But EMF is a secondary effect of being ungrounded and having our immune system compromised. Once your health is compromised, then EMF are problematic. Yeah. So that's great. I'm glad you found Earthing, and I'm glad you're joined the team here and help get the message out there and help as many people as we can.
Well, thanks so much.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. Namaste.
When I contacted Clint to be on this show, I was already experimenting with grounding and noticing health benefits. Like I mentioned to him, I could work for longer on the computer. I was sleeping better. My weight, which has been slowly coming off over time since I started the whole raw meat experiment, that was plateauing, and all of a sudden I started losing weight again. So overall, I was pretty jazzed up about grounding. And as an aside, I want to say that is one of the coolest parts of having a podcast. If I'm really interested in something, I can contact the experts, and often, at least one of them is going to be down for an interview. It's a great way to learn and network. So, but one of the things that Clint said, which was so fascinating, is that humans and possibly other animals use electrical signals as a trigger for our fight or flight mechanism. So Clint was talking about how you can sense a bear in the woods without really hearing or smelling or just being aware of him in any other way, except the hairs on your arm raise up from an electrical signal. Now, if that's true, that really connects a major dot for me, which is, why is our society going insane? Why are health problems spiraling out of control? Why is obesity continuing to climb? All the cures for obesity out there, from alkaline diets to keto. None of these are really putting a dent in the overall demographic trend. Why are people not connecting to God, like their inner truth and inspiration, which would give them the wisdom to see through a lot of these lies out there? Well, one of my explanations for all these fun things, along with seed oils and pesticides and all that fun stuff, has been EMF. But Clint really connected that the EMF triggers the fight or flight system within us. So instead of that little bump higher from the bear, which would be natural, the EMF is constant, and the sympathetic nervous system doesn't turn off, which eventually burns you out and shows up as one of these chronic diseases. And so the dot that he connected for me is that the EMF is actually a natural system that's kind of gone haywire. It's like it's there. It was always in us. We're designed on a very subtle level to be able to detect electrical fields. And now we've kind of taken that and gone nuts with it. Now, my solution was avoidance. And maybe that's the right answer for people like me. But grounding, that may be able, at least for the healthy people, to resist EMF enough that they don't spiral down into hell when they get exposed to a lot of it. Grounding may also be able to bring the people harmed by EMF, like me, back to health. I mean, I loved when he said to the lady who had MS, you don't have MS anymore. You have MS damage, which may take a while to heal, but you don't have MS. I mean, that was great. For myself, I am going to be grounded as often as I can now, and in as many ways as I can. I have a couple grounding sheets on my bed. I have a grounding bracelet that has a very long cord that I can plug into wherever I am. So if I'm by my computer, I can plug it in there. If I'm in the kitchen cooking something, I can plug it in there, and it's long, so I can kind of walk around a little bit. But if you want to try grounding out, I will say that when I first started grounding, just as a heads up, I was tired all the time. So I'm normally a pretty energetic, like go-getter type of person. And I did this grounding for about a week, and I felt like I was just dragging the whole time. And this would make sense, right? Because it was draining out the fight or flight out of me, as Clint would put it. And when the weekend came, I decided just to have a totally lazy day. I got up at the normal time, I ate breakfast, then I ended up going back and laying down in bed, and I dozed for like 3 hours. After that, I just watched YouTube videos for most of the day. And just let me say, this is not normal for me. This is nuts. I am not someone who normally is good at resting. I usually need to work. And I have a lot of passion. I mean, I do this podcast. I also trade the stock market pretty actively, although I don't really talk about that much. I have a job as well. Well, the question is, how does someone do all these things, which all take time? Well, I work all the time. I do things on the weekends. I'm always working. But that lazy day, man, I have never felt so rested after that day. I just felt this complete feeling of renewal. And since then, I don't get tired anymore from grounding. And if anything, it sometimes gives me energy. So there was some type of work that needed to get done in my body, some needed rest that the grounding facilitated. And I will also say that it seems like the more grounding contact you have, the more intense it is. So if you just have the bracelet on, if I have the bracelet on, it's like, okay, good, I'm grounded. But if I have the bracelet on and I'm laying on a grounding sheet, it seems like I get even more tired. So there's just, you should know that if you're going to get into this, you might get a little sleepy. I also want to say I've been more mentally calm since that day. I noticed that the more tired I am, the less calm I feel. When I'm tired, I feel like I need to do things, which is kind of strange. But if you do experiment with grounding, just let me know what kinds of reactions you have. Let me know what you experience. But yeah, thanks so much for listening. I will have the links in the show notes where you can look at Clint's website along with the studies and his book. I really appreciate him coming on, and I appreciate you listening. Please share this podcast if you did get value from it, and I'll see you next time.